Well, first, I apologize for the cold. We're trying to figure out a way to warm it up a little bit. I think our discussion is going to be lively, so hopefully that will help. We'll see.
We promise.
All right, we're going to get started. Just want to first say thanks to the Climate Action Reserve for including all of us throughout the meeting and on the panel. It's just a great opportunity to reconnect with all of our old friends and new friends and partners. Today, we're going to talk about the role of financing for forest protection. This panel was initially focusing on projects, but because we've got some incredible experts here with a range of jurisdictional experiences and project experiences, we're going to sort of cover both. And I know there's a lot of experience in the audience, so when we get to the Q&A session, if you want to bring up specific issues that we don't raise, we'll do our best to answer, but you have some answers as well, so we're hoping to engage you all. The forest project space, the jurisdictional program space, things beyond carbon markets really dominate a large part of the conversation about climate mitigation, as we all know. And that's really from the compliance space for many compliance programs. It's from the voluntary space for many of the programs you all work on. And it's really front and center for forest jurisdictions and communities in those jurisdictions. However, probably not surprisingly, finance for protecting forests is nowhere near where it needs to be to actually drive the scale we need and to recognize the action that's occurring now and incentivize more action. We're talking from, I'll introduce myself in a second, on really a new forest economy approach of how do we incentivize larger scale change for benefit of forests, climate, and people. And that's really where we're taking the topic of today's conversation to that little higher level perspective. This is really looking at a new forest economy that helps protect intact forests, incentivizes further restoration of degraded lands, and creates jobs and economic opportunities for the millions of people who live in the forest. There's a lot of discussion on finance of the mechanisms and modalities when finance goes to communities, to forest developers, to jurisdictions. That may take the form of upfront payment or results-based payment, offtake agreements. Those are all really important, and we may get to some of those topics today. Again, we're going to take a step back to talk about the larger scale planning that jurisdictions and investors can do around protecting forests. I'm Jason Gray. I'm the project director for the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force, which is a very long name. We go by the GCF Task Force. We're 43 states and provinces. We have some experts from within this task force here today across 11 countries. This was founded by California back in 2008. And this is really where our jurisdictions are focused. How can they help set up jurisdictional planning to de-risk investment for you all to come in and help protect forests, create jobs, and protect communities? We're one of the largest platforms for states and provinces in the world on this specific topic, and we're thrilled to engage with everyone here at the conference. I'm really more honored to introduce our panelists today, and they're going to be doing most of the talking after I stop my little speech here. And first, we're going to hear from Silvia Llamas, who was recently appointed as head of the International Affairs and Financial Promotion Unit for Mexico's National Forestry Commission, CONAFOR. Silvia's responsibilities include designing, implementing, monitoring and evaluating policies and strategies related to international cooperation around climate change while fostering financial support for the forest sector. And she's here. Silvia has over 20 years of experience in ecosystem conservation, natural resources management, and low emissions rural development, as well as working with regional and international partnerships to promote REDD+. Before joining CONAFOR, Silvia was the director of the GCF Task Force in Mexico, through our partner organization, Pronatur Sur. She's helped coordinate that for many years, working across the 7 states that are members of our task force in Mexico. She holds a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's in regional studies in environment and development. We'll then go to Fabiola Munoz, who's on the end here, who directs our program in Peru. Fabiola is a lawyer with a master's degree in social policy. She has been the Minister of Environment and Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation for Peru, besides other appointments, including Deputy Director of the U.S. Forest Service Cooperation Program in Peru. So some amazing people on the panel. And last but not least, another amazing person, Jessica Orrego. Jessica has worked in the carbon market space for 20 years. She currently serves as Director of Natural Climate Solutions at Mercuria Energy Trading, where she oversees the screening and implementation of a global pipeline and portfolio of nature-based carbon projects and programs. Prior to joining Mercuria, Jessica was the Managing Director at the Architecture for REDD+ Transactions and the Director of Forestry at the American Carbon Registry, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with in this room, are both enterprises at the Windrock International. During the early years of her career, Jessica served as the Technical Director of an investment fund focused on forest carbon assets, managed by Equator LLC, as the U.S. Director and as the U.S. Director of Implementation at EcoSecurities and Director at Plan Vivo. Her career has provided her with expertise and a deep understanding of the carbon market space and technical requirements to create robust offset credits. So we're in for a good conversation, I hope. We're going to proceed with kind of one question to each panelist, and then we'll do 2 rounds of those questions. I will do my best to facilitate that, and then we'll come to you all, and we really want to have time to have you engage with these experts who are up here. And I'm going to start to my left with Silvia. Silvia, over the last several years, there's been an increase in the number of forest projects in Mexico and state-level forest programs. You've been helping support state-level efforts through many years prior to your new role at CONAFOR. How do you see the evolving efforts for greater alignment between the state-level programs and the federal government in Mexico, and how might this help attract more finance to protect forests?
Thanks, Jason. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. This is my second time in this North American Carbon Conference, and it's always nice to see what's going on within the carbon scenario and world and role in all these specific necessities and in the sector, in the forestry sector, of course. And well, related to the question you just mentioned, and that's between the alignment of state governments and the federal government and the opportunities I see. Well, I guess what happened in Mexico in the last administration, for the last 6 years, let's say, is that based on the change of priorities of the federal government in Mexico related to carbon markets, in general, the forest sector, and the different alignment of the policies more related to social issues and topics. What I think that happened is that the subnational level had the opportunity to identify spaces in the sector that they were not, let's say, using or exploring because of a different model of working between the federal and the state levels. So what I see is that the subnational level positioned in a different way within the sector, within the donors and the funding bags, and that's something important. And they develop different alliances that position them in a different scenario and platform to progress on the objectives and goals at the subnational level, on trying to progress on the implementation and intervention at the territorial level. And that's something that back then, when I was more related to the subnational level, I saw as an opportunity to explore and to strengthen the subnational level differently. And now in my new role in the federal government, I must say that we are convinced that the subnational level, it's a strategic key for bringing progress and results. They are the ones that are closer to the territorial level. So for us at the national level, we will keep promoting and supporting subnational opportunities since they are key for our strategy. Our strategy is to give results at the territorial level, to promote implementation and intervention at the territorial level. And for us, one of the most important arms are the subnational governments. So I guess we had a period 6 years ago to strengthen the subnational level, and now we really want to take advantage of that position. On how they position subnational levels, their presence in the sector, within the alliances in the sector, to use it as a way of promoting more involvement, opportunities, and really try to progress on the implementation and give the results we need and get our commitment at the NDC level and give those results we're all expecting.
Thanks, Silvia. I'm taking notes as we're talking here. I think the interlay between what you just said and some of the remarks from the plenary this morning in terms of that alignment, how important it is, and also how it can serve as a backstop when the national government may not be going the direction that the states want to go. We'll come back to you on more on the efforts in Mexico. We're going to move south for the moment, though, all the way to the end. Fabiola, in Peru, the regional governments, so the state level, in particular those that are members of the GCF task force, have been advancing initiatives around bioeconomy, sustainable supply chains, and financing around these efforts. Carbon market efforts and carbon market finance has been a little slower in Peru to take hold. How do you see this landscape evolving for forest finance in Peru?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to stay here and listen to us. I think one of the challenge that we have in the country is to create the conditions for a really deep process for dialogue, no? Because normally in the international level, we make the agreements with the national government, no? I work in the national government for some years, and we discuss in representation of the government, no, of the country. But the mechanisms that we have internally in the country to work together, the national level and the subnational level of government, are not really a lot, or they are not really development in the best way that it's possible. For that reason, we are trying to learn about the other countries, for example, and the GCF, it's one of the opportunities that we have to learn about how we can improve the dialogue between the different levels. But this is not a problem only in the national or subnational government. We need to do the same thing, for example, in the civil society or in the indigenous, because we have national organizations, regional organizations, and local organizations. But we need to improve the capacities of the different actors to have spaces for dialogue, no? This is one of the most important things. But who make that investment? Nobody. There's no cooperation, or there are few corporations that really invest to create the conditions, the environment for process, for dialogue, no? The companies try to see, okay, I am going to make the investment, but there's a business. And if the rules are not clear, okay, we are going to go to other places. But we need to help, for example, to discuss, to have process to discuss the rules. One of the problems in Peru for the carbon market is that we don't have really process or spaces to discuss the rules with the national, the regional, the indigenous, the civil society. We take decisions in the government, but not all the decisions in the national government are really discussed with the regional or the indigenous. In a lot of years, this, I think 10 years, we try to improve that. It's not really success in all the moments, but I think we improved. We have some things better than some years ago, but we need to understand more how we can go faster, because we don't have time. We are losing a lot of money, because I come here and I see the examples of the investments, and I said, aha, Peru is losing opportunities, no? And we need to help and make investment to create the conditions to take that opportunities as soon as possible, no? And the other side is develop capacities in the people who take decisions, because one gap that we have in the national level of the government, it's that the people, it's really far, far away from the territory. And they have capacities, but not really the sense or the feeling of the land, no? In the other side, you have regional governments, but they don't have enough capacities to understand and to discuss these kind of things. But they have the feelings of the territories. And you have the indigenous. Probably the indigenous make a huge effort last years, and they are part of the groups that has more knowledge about the carbon market in this moment in the country. But it's a huge, huge effort, no? And there are some actors that help them in this process. This is really important, but not the same with the regional governments or the national governments or other actors, because in the territory we have different players, no? For that reason, I think we need to think about the investment in an integral way. When I think in the title, role of a financing for forest protection, when you use protection, the word protection, normally think, technologies or things like that. But capacities, process to work together, how we can improve the way to work together, and access to information. I think this is part of the things.
Thanks, Fabiola. I think that focus on the space for the dialogue, like this space, but also increasing that space within the territories where the actions to protect forests or to cut down forests are happening is critically important. And I really like how you frame kind of the financing piece in that broader way of how do you create that structure to really de-risk everybody's type of investment, whether it's time, building more capacity, and ultimately getting funding on the ground. We're going to also come back to that, and I hope you guys are taking notes here as well.
Jason,
Yep.
I forgot, sorry, but one of the other key elements is that I think you are not going to know that, but in the last years, in the country, we have a lot of laws to try to prevent corruption. And for that reason, this strangle the people who work in the government, for example, to have contact with the private sector, no? And this is a problem, because it's really important to have channels to discuss, space to discuss with the private sector. But people, it's afraid in the government to have this. This is one of the key elements that we need to understand, that it's not healthy for the system. Sorry, I forgot this.
No, thank you for adding that. I mean, it goes to that space of the dialogue and making sure that everyone's really at the table. And that, again, that de-risking current and future investment by making sure that it is transparent and folks are at the table, private sector included. We're going to, again, come back to that. Jessica, you covered a little bit of this on a panel on Tuesday in terms of the importance of kind of this, from an investor's perspective, what are the jurisdictions doing on that planning, creating that capacity space? How does Mercuria, who's been very active in this realm, in this world for a long time, at the project level and the jurisdiction level, how do you assess these types of spaces or lack of spaces? And really, what is Mercuria doing in this space?
Okay. Yeah, first of all, thank you to the Reserve and also Jason for having me on this panel. And for everyone who's sitting it out, I'm freezing, so I bet you are too. You're feeling better? Okay, good.
I have this.
So I just wanted to quickly, like a little background on who Mercuria is and what we're doing, and then I can kind of dive into a little bit of how we work with the jurisdictions. Mercuria is one of the largest private trading companies in the world. We're based in Switzerland. We have a presence in around 50 countries with about 1,400 people on staff, and we cover a variety of commodity markets, kind of with a focus on energy and minerals. And then where I fit into the company is about 2 years ago, Mercuria's owners committed $500 million to invest in nature restoration and nature-based solutions. And so this includes investments in a wide range of assets, including real assets and carbon projects. And the focus is in basically 2 areas: forest restoration and jurisdictional REDD+. I mean, there's a lot of other things we're looking at too. And just kind of in terms of how we work, we're a pretty small team, but we rely heavily on really strategic partners on the ground. So for example, I see a couple of them right here actually. So, for example, in Mexico, we work with our partner, Canopia Carbon, where we have a portfolio of forest restoration projects with Ejidos. So I think over 25 projects now. And in Peru, we also have a strategic partner, and there our portfolio consists of mostly REDD+, but also some restoration. And similar in Brazil, we have a jurisdictional deal there, and also restoration. And in the United States, we launched a company that aggregates small-scale landowners into harvest deferral, improved forest management. So we're pretty busy and in different geographies. And then just kind of pivoting to the jurisdictional REDD, we work in partnership with the subnational government of Misiones in Argentina, where we're developing a jurisdictional REDD+ program with them. We are also have a partnership with the state government of Tocantins in Brazil, developing a jurisdictional REDD+ deal with them as well. We also have a partnership with Guyana and others that hopefully we'll announce soon as well. So we're very active in this space, and just in terms of how we work with jurisdictions, we're not just, typically not just like an off-taker, but we enter the programs at the early stage and invest in all of the pieces that are needed to develop programs. And that's not just the documents that you submit to the registry or to the verifier, although that's obviously a huge part of it, but we're really developing the programs so that they can actually reduce deforestation and forest degradation in a way that's sustainable. So, setting up all of these kind of important pillars, like step one, articulating a REDD+ strategy, or low carbon development strategies, often how it's called. And, in some states, like thanks to the GCF or other multi and bilateral programs that have already been in existence under the REDD framework, they already have these in place, but in other states we enter and there's nothing like that in place. So that's the first thing where, you articulate what measures, policies, incentives, we mentioned bioeconomy, which is going to be so key, are needed to reduce deforestation. So, how you do that, you identify what the drivers of deforestation are, what the stakeholders are. You value the stakeholders that both cause deforestation and also protect the forest. So, there's a lot of different stakeholders. These are complex programs. We're looking at, deforestation from fire to soy and cattle to, sweat and agriculture and everything in between. So really complex programs. So we set them up and then we bring them through the program and generate credits. We also obviously have to set up MRV systems so that we know exactly what we're talking about when we say that we're claiming results. So really very, very robust emissions accounting. That can be tricky because forest degradation is really tough to measure, and we have to identify what it actually is and how we measure that. And then all of this has to be implemented in a manner that has very, very broad stakeholder participation. So participatory stakeholder consultations with every kind of stakeholder. So we're talking about, Bungie, who's, one of the biggest cattle producers in the world, all the way to very remote local communities and everyone in between. So different kinds of messages, and really important to have all of that, very, very kind of robust safeguards in general. And then, benefit sharing is obviously a huge part of that as well. So where is the carbon revenue? Once we finally get the credits, the carbon revenue comes in, where is that going to go and how is it going to be allocated? Who gets what? do indigenous people want the same benefits as soy producers? Probably not. So, all very clear about how it's going to be, the funds are going to be managed and where it's, who's going to benefit. And obviously the government has to be a big beneficiary of the funds because they have to implement all of these programs to reduce deforestation. So complex programs, every state, every program that we enter is a new set of challenges. There's no two that are alike. I mean, we have some learning that we can apply from, state to state, but we're also seeing a lot of key differences. So that's how we work.
Thanks, Jessica. I mean, the work that Mercuria has done on this in terms of investing at every single point of that whole ecosystem is really, along with Fabiola said, is what's needed. And it's both impressive and also, I'm sure, daunting for your team and also the folks you're working with to see the complexity that's involved in there. And for investors who may not be as involved in every step of the way, it's a longer term process. But you did mention that jurisdictions that have done some thinking or some learning on this, I don't know if they're faster, but maybe a little bit easier in terms of engaging because capacity may already exist. And maybe that's helped bring in some initial investment. So I want to take that to Silvia. Do you see opportunities sort of out of the work at the national and subnational level in Mexico for investors kind of in the same space? Could a Mercuria, it sounds like Mercuria is already in Mexico, but could a Mercuria come in and how can that help advance the goals of those states, in particular those that may already have a jurisdictional strategy in place?
Well, I see many opportunities. Where I see the challenge is in the size of the funding it is available. As I just said, we have identified that implementation is the biggest necessity at the jurisdictional level. So intervening the territory it's the necessity. And probably there are some funds that are a good size, but the complexity of accessing those funds is another story. And then, yeah, we need capacities to implement funds, but I feel we can progress in parallel by promoting this capacity building at the same time we implement. And that can be solved by having good alliances between actors and sectors. And there is an example at the GCF task force that we know well, that is this window A and B finance strategies that were supported by Norway. And obviously governments need capacities and help. And a really good model that was used with that finance was the implementing partners. So governments chose an implementing partner and they developed a very strong alliance to design the project, implement the project, and report the project. I have been also in the civil society side, and I can tell that many projects at the civil society level get really complicated because they don't have strong alliances with governments. They just start with the alliance for designing the project. Then everyone forgets the alliance. And then at the end of the project, they come back again to show results and to get support for reporting those results. And I think that's a huge mistake. If we like it or not, governments are the ones with the responsibility, and we need to align with other actors to be able to get to the ground and show the results and get the results. So I see a lot of opportunities. I think there are models that have been proved that can help a lot between governments, civil society, donors, and I really see a good result on that model used at the GCF task force. I really like it. We really like it now in CONAFOR, and we're convinced of that. But yeah, we need more money, and I guess carbon markets or based for results payment mechanisms are a key element to help incentivize that we keep progressing, but there is not enough money in those mechanisms for implementing everything we need to implement, because implementation requires lots of money. We have even made numbers to see how much a ton should be paid if we use that money to do the whole process. And we were having results of 300 USD per ton, for example. That's impossible. What we need to promote is that the money from this type of mechanisms become an incentive for the people who are implementing on the ground, for governments that really need to promote and incentivize. And we see it as a very useful tool to complete this strategy, but where I see the big challenge is in the available money we have seen related to implementation. I think we can have good mechanisms and tools for incentivizing, complementing strategies, but the problem is the amount you need to go and intervene the territory. That's what I can say.
Thanks, Silvia, and thanks for mentioning the Window A and Window B. These are two funding streams that the Norwegian government supported this task force on doing that really help bring those dialogue spaces together by ensuring that governments are able to work with communities and having some of that, I don't want to call upfront finance because it wasn't a specific for carbon markets, but really some of that initial investment to help set the stage for policy design, implementation, and then eventually attraction of, hopefully,
Other
additional mechanisms. Yeah, no, thank you. And I think the experiences in Mexico are really important to learn from and hopefully help leapfrog in other places. And I think for investors in the room, many of you are probably more steeped in this than we are. I used to be on the compliance side for the California carbon market. I was the head of the market for a long time. And we would get, at the government level in California, a lot of investors and companies coming to say, we want to engage on your rule design process. On the flip side, I've talked to a lot of investors who are investing in the Global South, with exceptions like Mercuria, who's involved in incredible spaces with governments and communities. And that's a different question a lot of times, at least from the experience I've had with these conversations, of some investors are very reluctant to engage with governments. So it's an interesting dynamic where a compliance market that sets a government very clear signal and higher valued price in California, how do you apply that same process in the Global South where a lot more capacity may be needed, a lot more engagement may be needed, but at the end of the day, that will provide more certainty. So it does help investment to engage in these processes. That's my soapbox. I'll get off it for a second. Fabiola, in Peru, as you're designing and looking at these different platforms for engagement, how do you see carbon market finance being leveraged not just for profits or for protecting the forest, but also for ensuring that communities and the jurisdictions working with the communities get support over the long run?
We're trying to work together with the different levels and try to improve the capacities of the actors to put in place that jurisdictional approach. No? Indigenous has this red indígena amazónico, no? Amazonian indigenous red. And the regional governments has this red jurisdiccional, no? That is the approach that I think we need to work together with the national level, the regional level, and indigenous to put like a puzzle, how we are going to connect this and how we are going to have the incentives to really put in place this and solve some problems that all of them are going to have. For example, the system for monitoring. You are not going to be a good or do a good work if you monitor this but not the other part. You need a system for that. No? The other thing is the rules for share the benefits. And the rules need to be really clear. Sometimes we think that because we talk with the national level of the region or the indigenous organizations or the regional level, it's okay. It's not enough. They need a lot of effort and they need resources to go to the field. I don't know if you know this data, it's real. I use an instrument that we have in Peru that it's the index of competitive that the Institute of Economy of Peru provide. It's public all the years. And if you see some of the numbers, for example, in education for comprehensive, in a region like Loreto, that is the biggest in the country, it's 1% the capacity of comprehensive that the children has in 2 of secondary level in the school. If we don't know that, we are not going to be prepared to discuss a contract. How we are going to discuss a contract with the people of a community that has this kind of comprehensive level? For that reason, it's really important to be really transparent, to work together with the different levels, to open this process, and to help the indigenous to do the process, to discuss this in details. It's not possible that a community is going to discuss and understand all the complex articles in a contract alone, but they need to work together with the organizations, with the government, with the responsible private sector to increase capacities of the actors of the system. I think part of the financing we need to put together to develop capacities and to create the conditions for a health market. Because all of us, we are trying to push to stop deforestation, stop degradation. We are involved in that. We want to do that. But we need to create the conditions to do that in the best way.
Thanks, Fabiola. I'm going to go right to Jessica because this goes to a question for you. As an investor in this space, what do you see as these kind of similar distinctions between project scale finance, jurisdiction scale finance, and where would you like to see a larger focus from the finance community? Leading question, sorry.
I'm not going to pick a favorite. As I said, we invest in projects and in jurisdictional. Both are very much core to our strategy. So we certainly don't personally think that we need to favor one or the other. We're very much interested in both. They're so different, though, and the challenges are different. I think that the market eventually, when they figure out what JRED is, will react differently to jurisdictional RED too. I think we're at an early stage for jurisdictional RED in the market in general. But in terms of financing it, I mean, it's just so incredibly different how we enter a project versus a jurisdictional deal. Engaging with projects, you're engaging directly with indigenous communities or small landowners. You're targeting reforestation on a small area, relatively small area, or degradation or deforestation of areas where there are biodiversity and deforestation hotspots. So really different. Whereas the jurisdiction, you have every single kind of ecosystem, an entire state or country, and there's biodiversity hotspots, and there's fire scars, and there's just everything in between, and lakes, and everything is accounted for, right? You're accounting for entire jurisdiction. So much more complicated in terms of how you address the drivers of deforestation. You're working with governments. versus in a project where, you were hopefully working with local communities and indigenous people as partners, and that's kind of what we're trying to do more frequently. In all cases, I think that there's commonality where, you have to have strong partnerships with the stakeholders. You have to have benefit sharing that are robust. You have to have transparency. For us, across the board, integrity is just absolutely key, not just because that's what, is important to us in terms of investment, but also because the market demands high integrity. So it's been good. It's really, I think that the market has really pushed investors to really make, kind of guarantee that. But yeah, I don't think one is more important than the other. I think that they absolutely both need to happen. I think that they both have such different impacts. And ideally, we would have a situation where there's kind of a landscape approach in a given country or state where, you have indigenous people and local communities or landowners working really hard to either, restore forests or, restore degraded forests, reforest, and protect protect existing forests. I think we're going to need a lot of also systems like bioeconomy systems where we improve sustainable agriculture. So we're really kind of interested in seeing a landscape approach, and that includes projects and jurisdictional scale programs.
Thanks. I almost got you on that one. I think that's key in terms of how do jurisdictions and communities and investors think about the need for government involvement in some capacity, and maybe on the project space, how do you nest those within that structure? And I know that Vera has their JNR, and there's a lot of discussions around nesting projects in jurisdictional approaches. But to the larger point of working with all the actors along within the specific context of that country or that community, and yet building in lessons and hopefully leapfrogging from things that exist to other places. All to say this is complicated. We have some time for audience questions, and I'll come back to you all for some kind of final thoughts, but do we have microphones anywhere? Anyone want to be the first to go? All right. Do we have microphones?
Here without a mic.
Okay. Yep.
We are a carbon project developer in the Peruvian. Sorry, thank you. In the Amazon rainforest now. So we have been in the carbon market now for 17 years. So we have gone through the high, the lows. With BCN 1.0, now with BCN 2.0, we expect to be there for BCN 100.0, right? And we have seen that there is money in the carbon market, there is interest, and maybe now more on removals. And I have this question. So in the case of direct air capture, right, which we know that there is a lot of investments there, billions of dollars, and maybe the cost of the carbon dioxide ton, it is of 400, maybe 1,000, right? So what are they doing different from we people in the forest trying to preserve or to restore that forest, that we are not able to capture that kind of financing means, right?
Great question. I will jump up and back and forth as we go. Does anyone want to take that? Seeing some head shaking. That's a very good question. I'll give a perspective. Let me go back up here. Sorry.
I'm Peruvian. I have a conflict of interest.
All right, easy punt over to me then. Yeah, that's a great question. I think those of us in the forest space have been looking at that with kind of trepidation and some strong concern about the hyper-focus on removals, even including, from my personal perspective, just removals in the forest space. We know we need to have reductions and large-scale forest protection, regardless of where other financing may be going. We've heard, for those of you who've been at other panels throughout this week, I think a lot of interest in looking at what some folks say that's the only permanent way is through direct air capture that then is sequestered somehow and it's not in a forest which has risk. I think Rajinder Sahota was really great from the California government yesterday, saying, well, there's a risk of leakage in that sector too. My view is there's been some very strong stakeholders in this space that are just really not as convinced on the nature space in driving investors into DAC or CDR that's kind of more technologically focused. I don't have a great answer for you on that. I think it's just continuing to highlight the need for the science behind making sure both are happening at the same time, and not leaving what is not currently as expensive, but much more needed urgently in the forest and land space. And my suggestion would just be to continue talking to investors about the urgent need and then the successes. Having folks engage with Mercuria, having folks engage with governments would be my sense. But
It's more cost efficient too, right? So,
yeah.
yeah, thank you. It is more cost efficient too. So as we only have one world, supposedly free trade is good. We don't know that any longer, maybe. But I mean, it is not only that it is good for forests, but for the whole NDCs and the targets that we have as a world to become net zero by 2050, right?
Other questions? I don't know how long this cord will go, so you may have to come up here sit next to me. Anybody else?
Or just do it loudly.
Or do it very loudly, yes.
So building up on what our colleague says here, doesn't that show a fundamental flaw in the system? Because carbon credits, we are calling everything carbon removal. And imagine that overnight, the price of these carbon sequestration projects dropped to zero, right? So all the red projects would be abandoned, right? Because if you just want to remove the carbon, then who cares about forests? So I think it's a fundamental flaw of the system that like all the co-benefits, the social benefits, the biodiversity benefits, yada, 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 are not properly valued and called co-benefits.
Good point. Anybody? Jessica?
I mean, I agree. It's a huge concern. The market is soft. It's very fragmented. Corporates are worried that they're going to be criticized for buying the wrong projects, so they're very cautious. So we have a lot of work to do to raise the bar on integrity in our investments and then show the world that our projects meet all of these incredible requirements, and they're not just co-benefits. Exactly. I mean, there's so many things there's so many benefits. There's such a climate impact, and it's absolutely essential. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have the answer. Obviously, if the market pricing goes down to zero, then it's really bad for all of us as investors, but it's really, really even worse for the climate and for the, communities on the ground that are expecting benefits for their hard work to reduce deforestation. So we're very worried about that as well.
And
Next
I
question.
guess, Jason, we're just doing probably the easiest part of the formula. I mean, concentrating on the rest would be the good thing to do, but that's more complicated. And even proving, that you have those results cost more than just focusing on the part we have dealt with. I guess I'm not saying it's easy, but probably is the easiest side of the road.
Yes. Would you like to come up here? Really loud if you can.
And at the end of the day, those co-benefits are considered in market. I mean, people want to buy these kind of credits over landfill projects, for example, because they have all these co-benefits. Sometimes as a lawyer, what is complicated many times is to try to express that in an agreement, because many times investors and buyers want to express that they will be getting out not only the CRTs, but any other co-benefit from biodiversity, from water, and that's hard to express from a legal point of view. Because in Mexico especially, it's very, you have to, when you negotiate with an ejido, and especially with the current constitutional reforms, you have to be very clear what the ejido is giving away. And you're giving away the carbon, only the carbon. Because right now, currently, that's what you have in the Forest Protocol or in any carbon standards. But what is reflected by those co-benefits, those are reflected in the market, because people are more interested in buying that with those co-benefits than a project again from a landfill, or many times coming out from clean energy, and that's why they're more pricey, especially in the case for mangroves, for example. Blue carbon has much more demand in the market because all those co-benefits they have for being a very specific ecosystem, for the biodiversity issues that are implicated within the same. So at the end of the day, they are considered by the market. Sorry for commenting that.
Comment up here?
I can be loud.
Okay.
We heard a little bit yesterday about the new ETS system in Mexico and how it's going to be ready by the end of the year, operational next year. I just wondered if there was any kind of thoughts on that. I'm very new to the Mexico space, so just trying to learn. I'm from Carbon Pulse, and if on that, will it be ready by the end of the year? Are there any collaborations with other countries or markets that sort of either you're actively pursuing or you hope for is also okay?
Well, actually, probably I'm not the correct person to answer that question, but I'm going to give you my point of view and the sense I have. I don't think Mexico has finished deciding what it's going to be or how it is going to be like. The country would like to have its own design, but I guess they are seeing it as complicated. They need to keep getting relations with the outside. So at the beginning, it was a position of creating its own compensation mechanism within the country. But now we see, well, they see, I'm not included in that group, that's mostly impossible. So I don't think it is a clear position yet or a solution yet. But from the forest sector, and since we are really open to alliances and seeing collaboration to be able to get to the commitments, we are really encouraging to that side of the government to really open and get to the different sectors that can really help design a better strategy. So probably by the end of the year, we can have a more clear position, but I don't think so far it is totally defined.
We've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go to the very back. Go ahead.
My name is Lee. I work with a developer called Boca. So I was curious about your position or your view on investing, say, in like the Singapore carbon compliance market or offsets that may qualify for that.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Money on the panel with that.
Oh, I mean, we're very interested in those markets. Absolutely a huge opportunity. So bilaterals with Singapore and other countries under 6.2, looking at Corsia transactions as well. So yes, definitely very interested in both. And we see them as another market because voluntary carbon market right now is not only soft, but also very fragmented. Doesn't mean we're abandoning it, but we're looking at other opportunities, all the options. Yep.
So I saw one back here, and then we'll come over here. Oh, yep, go ahead.
My name is Jack. I'm a product developer based in Canada. And so I don't know if anybody else here is from Canada, but great. Where is the Canadian context in this whole week? That's a separate issue. But I just want to sort of comment and have a question. Canada has all the same problems. We have 98% of the country is considered crown land. 100% of that is indigenous land. So about 80% of the work that I do is working with indigenous communities in Canada. advance these conversations around how do you develop a carbon project? How do you assert your jurisdiction? How do you come to an agreement with provincial federal governments that you have rights here? And so when I speak to provinces on behalf of nations or in partnership with nations, it boils down to them just being scared. Like they are fearful of acknowledging indigenous rights over territory, jurisdiction over lands, and then we come at an impasse. And so I think there's room for the investment world to also acknowledge within their own system that indigenous communities have rights, they have authority, they have jurisdiction, and invest. Believe that and invest in that, and then, you know, constitutional law will figure out that long term, but in the near term, like, acknowledge that nations have rights and authority, invest, work with us, work with the nations. So I don't know, maybe my question is like, is it just fear from in other countries as well over just acknowledging those rights?
I've got a perspective, but panelists go first.
I mean, so I probably there's fear. I think in general, land tenure has to be clarified in many, many places for Indigenous people. So that's an ongoing issue. And in the carbon market, you know, as an investor, that's just a requirement, right? You have to show that you own the rights. You know, it has to be like this legal transaction. So, you know, to the extent that Indigenous territories are recognized and that they can show that they own the carbon, then we are 100% willing, and we do transact with Indigenous groups. We have a RED project in Peru where our partners are Indigenous community organizations. So we don't run away from that at all. We would much rather have them be partners than beneficiaries. So yeah, I think that it's just a matter of kind of clarifying that land tenure, and then hopefully we can get through it. What Fabiola mentioned, that there's Indigenous community, there's 3 Indigenous coalitions, like big organizations in Peru, that have come together to submit the first Indigenous territory jurisdictional RED Plus program to the ART Trees standard. So right there, I mean, that shows it's a highly collaborative process. They're working with the national government. They're looking now at aggregating Indigenous territories, you know, because there's several, I think over 30, you know, the exact number. But, and so once that's aggregated, it will be submitted. That's going to be, I think, a huge model for the rest of the world. So, you know, let's watch that one really closely.
And I think people need predictability, you know. It's really important for the private sector, for the indigenous, for the government, but not always you have the conditions to have that. No? This is part of the challenge. For example, we have a law to protect indigenous territories, but if the community didn't have the title and illegal mining comes, it's difficult for them to protect the area because they need the title to go to the police to protect it. No? This is one part of the problem. For that reason, we have an initiative in the country to close the gap for titling and tenure land for indigenous. No? But we identify different kind of problems. For example, how many communities needs to close the gap? And there's no information because one minister has one number. The regional organization has another number. The Minister of Culture has another number. All of them has different numbers. How you are going to know how much money you need to make the investment to close the gap if you didn't know the number? Or the areas. We have problems like in the past you used this system, now you use the other. It's impossible that you can register the information because you have 2 different systems. There are a lot of different things, but we need to recognize that we have these problems and we need to dialogue to try to solve that problems.
So we've hit our limit. We just got the stop sign. But that doesn't mean the conversation needs to stop. I think for your question, engage with every panelist up here. Engage with the folks in California. They've also had this working relationship and built a working relationship because indigenous tribes came and said, you better work with us, state of California. I think the models here are really interesting for Canada to also go on. And I just want to say more broadly, thank you guys so much for the insights from the investment, from the government, from the community perspective on this really hard but essential question of bringing more finance to drive more climate benefit. So thank the audience for the questions. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.